Heritage Month. This is November, and so do something to remember the people who were on these lands long before we got here. So, and that I have Sophia Maniakis. Hello, Maniakis. I'm sorry, I'm rattled right now.
No worries.
To do the land acknowledgement.
Sounds like a plan. Thank you so much for having me. It's so exciting to be back here. So especially because this is Indigenous Peoples Heritage Month, it's an important time to just remember and reflect whose land we're on. Currently, for those of us who are in Portland, Oregon, and Lake Oswego, we stand on the lands of the Molalla, the Cayuse, Tualatin Kalapuya, the Willamette Tumwater, the Wasco Wishram, Clackamas Chinook, and the other Chinook people of the Willamette area. We want to acknowledge them as the original inhabitants of this land and recognize that we are here because of the sacrifices that were forced upon them. Land acknowledgements are much, much more than just explanations and name checking the tribes and Native nations whose lands we occupy. That is never enough and will never be enough. These statements help demonstrate respect for and awareness of the enduring relationship between Indigenous people and place. Acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current and ongoing process, as is colonization, and it behooves us to seek and build an understanding of our present participation.
Thank you so much, Sophia. An excellent example of a land acknowledgement.
Thank you. I give my credit to Trina. She's actually she shared this with me. So if ever,
okay, Trina
is the mastermind behind this.
Okay, tonight our meeting goals. First of all, the mission of our organization is to educate and empower Lake Oswego residents and institutions with the tools to combat racism in all its forms and make LO and Oregon a better place to live for residents of all races and ethnicities. We ask that you listen to these agreements, and I'm hoping that you will follow them. Speak from your own experience. Use I statements. Don't generalize others' experiences. Listen with full presence, curiosity, and openness to other perspectives. Ask clarifying questions. Assume best intent and lean into the discomfort and the challenge biases. Oops, ouch. We may stimulate pain in ourselves and others. Please take care of yourself. Step up, step back. Speak up if you tend to hold back. Listen more if you tend to talk. And our expected outcomes, you'll get acquainted with who is in your breakout room. We won't solve racism in 2 hours, and you'll leave the meeting with more questions than you came with. You'll have one actionable item, and you'll have more ideas of how to interrupt racism. We try to keep a little data on our meetings, so we have 2 quick polls. First one, how many respond to racism community meetings have you attended in the last 12 months? And I don't have to read it to you unless someone needs help. Do we have most of them? Okay, let's go to poll number 2. It's one question. It's a long paragraph, and yes or no once only. Did you take at least one of these actions? Write a letter to the school board, explore CRT, critical race theory, on your own or in a group, write an opinion piece supporting equity. And that's a yes or no. Okay. Are we ready to move on, John?
The other polls doesn't seem to be popping up, Willie.
Okay.
It won't give us the tracking, but should we just type it in the chat?
I would say go ahead and do that. Yes or no for poll 2. Okay, we have so many people to thank. Our work is more than a community meeting every month. There's just lots of things that happen. And our last community meetings, our guest speakers were Doctors Marvin Lynn, Tara Yoso, and David Stovall. And they did an outstanding job in terms of presenting knowledge about, information about what critical race theory is, looks like, and what it's not. We want to thank Catherine Phelps, who is our story time. Let's see, I'm trying to figure out a big word for you, Catherine, because you're so talented. But our storytime coordinator and storyteller extraordinaire. How is that for Catherine? And Bruce Poinsett for the story time tonight. It was a graphic novel. So if you had a child there and they come home talking about the graphic novel they saw today, that would be great. Tam Hickson for giving community input in affordable housing. This is a project that's going to be going on with Merrillhurst and Mercy Housing, but they reached out and wanted some input, and they reached out to us, and Tam is representing our organization. Thanks go to Terry Kramer. I don't even know how to thank her. She heads up our policing committee, and last week we had the hearing, so time to share our input. But Terry went through the information, and she has done an extraordinary job of leading the committee, looking deep into policing practices, whatever we have here. And if you'll find out if we have our recommendations will be forthcoming. Poetry Slam, another great thing. I'm so proud of our youth. Sarah and Samantha co-facilitated a poetry slam. Now, I have to tell you, I didn't know what a poetry slam was until I saw it at the Starbucks, and they invited a poetry class from Lake Oswego High School to come, and they just, read poem after poem after poem, with everyone being appreciated and it was wonderful, wonderful. And I want to thank Chris McMahon, who's the manager there at Starbucks on Boone's Ferry up here. Um, he just arranged the Starbucks so that we had half of it, and other people, we didn't interfere with customers. And he bought a special rug to absorb the sound there. So he really went out of his way to help us. We want to thank Regan Parker for facilitating deepening our connections. It's an African American literature book discussion. Hispanic Heritage Month, thanks to the Lake Oswego Public Library, the Lake Oswego School District, LO for Love, and all of those that participated. Turn in your passports to the library by Friday, November 5th, to be entered in the drawing. We want to thank Bruce Poinsett for his Instagram live giveaway for 4 Sabros and restaurant gift prizes. I'm not finished. I don't know how many of you have heard of Henrietta Lacks, but the World the Health Organization recognized her and gave an award. She's not alive now. As a young mother, Henrietta Lacks and her husband were raising 5 children near Baltimore when she fell ill. She went to Johns Hopkins and was diagnosed with cervical cancer. She died on October 4th, 1951. She was only 31 years old. During the treatment, researchers took samples of her tumor. That HeLa cell line became a scientific breakthrough, the first immortal line of human cells to divide indefinitely in a library. The cells were mass-produced for profit without any recognition to her family. Over 50 million metric tons of HeLa cells have been distributed around the world, the subjects of over 75,000 studies. In addition to the HPV vaccine, HeLa cells allowed for development of the polio vaccine, drugs for HIV and AIDS, hemophilia, leukemia, and Parkinson's disease, breakthrough in reproductive health, including in vitro fertilization, research on chromosomal conditions, cancer, gene mapping, and precision medicine, and are used in studies responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. Though her life was cut short, Henrietta Lacks' contributions to medicine has led to remarkable scientific breakthroughs, saving countless lives and bringing us closer to eliminating cervical cancer. Dr. Sinead Fisaha, the co-chair of the Director General's Expert Advisory Group on Cervical Cancer Elimination, said her story is also a clear example. Her story is also a clear example of how Black women have long been overlooked in the healthcare and still are today. I want to say that
100
again.
participants.
Her story is also a clear example of how Black women have long been overlooked in healthcare and are still today. I applaud the World Health Organization for recognizing her, a vital step in acknowledging the incredible impact she's had on science and honoring her legacy in advancing health justice for people around the world. And now for the program that you came to learn some more about, I would like to introduce Kim V. To. She's a second generation Vietnamese American lawyer, community organizer, Lake Oswego resident, and parent. And she's also co-chair of the Lake Oswego DEI board and chair of LO for Love, a community organization dedicated to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in Lake Oswego. And I'm turning the program over to Kim V.
Thank you so much, Willie. I am so pleased and honored to be here tonight to moderate this important discussion about what is happening in Newberg. Tonight, we'll discuss how the Newberg School Board ban on Black Lives Matter signs and pride flags impact students, not only in Newberg, but here in Lake Oswego. We'll also talk about school board meetings, how they can be improved, and discuss what we as a community here in Lake Oswego can do to support our neighbors in Newberg, and what lessons can be learned so that we can prevent what's happening there from happening here in our community. Now, before I begin, I wanted to spend a couple of moments to just address the why of this discussion, why it's so important that we have this discussion tonight. You know, I think it's easy for some in our community to think that this is a Newberg problem, that what is happening there can't possibly happen here, that we can just rest on our laurels and do nothing. And I believe, and I'm sure many of you in this room believe, that this thinking is wrong and it's dangerous. And here's why. First of all, Newberg is a 30-minute drive away from Lake Oswego. And even though I've only lived and worked in Lake Oswego for about 7 years now, I know enough to know that the sentiment that empowered the Newberg School Board to enact that ban, a ban that harms already marginalized students and impedes their learning, is alive here and well in Lake Oswego. And if we don't care to weed it out, it will take root and flourish. Second, what's happening in Newberg is not unique to Newberg. It's happening all over Oregon and all over the country. Just this past summer in Albany School District, much like in Newberg, what happened there, a new majority was sworn in onto their school board, and immediately they fired their district superintendent. Their superintendent was a woman who just 1 month before had received stellar performance reviews and had her contract renewed by the previous board. The new board did not give a reason for their firing, but many suspect, including the former superintendent, that it was because she was doing things like holding parent forums in Spanish, steering district resources to students of color, and implementing DEI trainings for staff. So school boards all over Oregon, in Oregon City, Canby, Bend, are discussing how to ban policies and practices that teach students about the dark side of American history. Basically, any version that is told through a non-white lens. And we know here in Lake Oswego, in this forum here, from what we've learned from Dr. Marvin Lin in the past 2 community meetings about critical race theory and CRT, that this is all part of a greater movement against any teaching about systemic racism, anti-racism, homophobia, transphobia, bias awareness, cultural awareness, restorative practice, and even social emotional learning. We've all seen the viral videos of parents who don't want CRT in their schools shouting and threatening school board members. Well, packing school boards with people who think this way is also another strategy to get at the same thing. So I know I'm preaching to the choir in this group right here tonight, but it needs to be said, if we don't stay vigilant, if we don't listen to the stories like the ones that we're going to hear tonight from students, and if we don't take the time to take it to heart, and if we don't mobilize to protect our students and our community, we could soon find ourselves in a position like NEWBERG. So I'll conclude by giving the reminder. I'll conclude with the reminder that Lake Oswego School District's next school board election is 1.5 years from now. So in 2023 or earlier, 2 seats will open up, and we've got to be ready, and we will if we take action now. So that leads me to next welcome and introduce the panelists for tonight's discussion. I'm really happy to introduce first from NEWBERG, we have Jessie Mota. Welcome, Jessie. Jessie is a senior at Catalyst High School. She's involved and volunteers with her school's GSA, or Gay Straight Alliance. Jessie enjoys listening to bands, learning about her Mexican culture, and volunteering in the community. Jessie is a proud member of the BIPOC community in NEWBERG. Next, we have Joshua Reed. Josh is a NEWBERG School District counselor. He has been a strong advocate for students impacted by the NEWBERG School Board ban and is joining us today to support Jessie. Welcome, Jessie and Josh.
Hi.
Next, from Lake Oswego, we have Nidhi. Nidhi is a member of the Lake Oswego Youth Leadership Council and is currently serving as the sophomore class president at Lake Oswego High School. In her free time, she enjoys participating in speech and debate. Next, we have Lauren Zhang. Lauren is a junior at LO High School. She is involved in leading her school's speech and debate club, as well as the Ethics Bowl Club. Lauren's main focus is giving back to younger students through teaching math, speech, and debate. Finally, we have Sophia Maniakis. Sophia is a college student, graduate from Catlin Gable, and a former resident of Lake Oswego. Welcome, students and Counselor Reed. Thank you all so much for being here. I know you're all likely exhausted from talking about this topic, especially our NEWBERG panelists. I just want you all to know on behalf of everyone here that we know it takes tremendous courage to be here with us, to be vulnerable, to share your stories and your experiences with us so that we may learn from you and do better for ourselves and our community. So thank you so much for being here. So next, before we dive into the discussion, I'd like to spend a few moments setting the stage by going over a brief timeline of events that led to the NEWBERG School Board's controversial decision about a month ago. This was a suggestion by someone on our panel, and I think it's a good one. Understanding the context of how these events unfolded will allow our discussion to be richer in detail, help us better understand our panelists, and determine what actions we might need to take next. So our story began last year in June 2020. During that month, in the wake of George Floyd's death, the NEWBERG School Board passed an anti-racism proclamation. There was one lone board member who voted against the proclamation. This started a community conversation as to why this one board member voted against the proclamation. Interest in the school board meetings skyrocketed during this time. Public attendance records show that before the school board meeting, about 20 people would attend. During the summer of 2020, this number skyrocketed to 300 to 400. Later that same year, in December 2020, the school board additionally passed a resolution adopting the Oregon state mandated all students belong policy. This policy recognizes that student health and safety are the cornerstone of education, and that all students are entitled to an education free of harassment, fear or hatred, racism, or violence. The policy also requires that districts ban the use or display of recognized hate symbols such as the noose, the swastika, and the Confederate flag specifically, since these are the three most recognized symbols of hate in the United States. Again, the same school board member who voted against the district anti-racism proclamation was the sole vote against the board's adoption of the All Students Belong policy. We fast forward then to spring of 2020, this past year, when many cities across Oregon had their school board elections. In May, 2 individuals were elected to the NEWBERG School Board. These individuals had run on campaigns backed by a political action committee called Save Our Schools. This election single-handedly changed the makeup of the 7-member school board. And now that one school member who had voted against the district anti-racism policy and the All Students Belong policy now found himself with a majority on the school board. Just a couple months later, in July, the new board members were sworn in and a highly contentious school board meeting ensued. Now with the board majority, the 2 new board members, along with 2 other board members already on the board, had the votes to elect 2 of their own as board chair and vice chair. At that same meeting, the vice chair introduces discussion of banning for the first time BLM signs and pride flags in the district, as well as repealing the district's anti-racism and state-mandated All Students Belong resolutions. Because these items were not on the agenda, they ultimately got pushed to the school board's next meeting in August. At this point, though, many people and organizations all around the state had caught wind of what was going on in NEWBERG. 16 district school counselors, including Josh, who's on our panel, and even state legislators sent letters to the NEWBERG School Board urging them to vote no on the proposed ban. This ultimately did not sway the majority on the board. In August, they voted 4-3 on a resolution specifically to ban BLM signs and pride flags, and broadly any what they called political signs, clothing, and other items. As we all know, this decision was met with outrage throughout the state and throughout the country. For instance, the NEWBERG City Council wrote a letter to the school board saying their decision makes NEWBERG less welcoming, which is a detriment to and not reflective of the character of our community. Letters of condemnation came pouring in from the Oregon Board Members Color Caucus, the Oregon House Democratic Caucus, the Oregon Legislature's BIPOC Caucus. Even the ACLU of Oregon sent out a tweet in defense of students and staff rights, and a property owner near the high school constructed a huge pride flag on the hill overlooking the high school in protest. Then in September, as I'm sure we can all remember, news outlets reported that Black NEWBERG high school students were the target of a social media group chat called Slave Trade, where participants joked about how much they would pay for their Black classmates in a slave auction. Later that same month, a teacher's aide working at a NEWBERG elementary school showed up to school in blackface and dressed as Rosa Parks. She said that she was protesting the vaccine mandate for teachers. During this month, there were a few bright spots where there were shows of solidarity with NEWBERG students. A Beaverton girls soccer team knelt during the national anthem, as did a Tigers football team, where fans also displayed BLM and pride banners at the game in solidarity with NEWBERG. Finally, towards the end of the month, on September 28th, the NEWBERG School Board, likely due to growing concerns as to the legality of their previous ban, rescinded their prior resolution to remove the specific language that was used, and instead voted to enact a ban on what they call any political, quasi-political, and controversial symbols or images. This leads us to current day. Now that we've had a chance to refresh our minds as to the timeline, we can start the discussion. All right, enough of me jabbering on. I'm going to first turn to Jesse to add some context and flesh out this timeline. And Josh, if you feel it's appropriate, please chime in. Jesse, could you tell us what it was like that summer of 2020 when that one school board member voted against the district anti-racism resolution? Like, what was the reaction among students, and what type of conversations were being had at that time? Do you remember?
There was a lot of, I feel like, a very chaotic, like a lot of people just not understanding what, a lot of students, a lot of people just not understanding why they were deciding to do this, and why all of a sudden, when we've had these things implemented, why they all of a sudden became a problem, and people became very like uncomfortable with the fact that they were doing that, and a lot of people didn't think that it was okay, and I was really confused as to why we were, they were even talking about doing that. It felt very like backhanded, like they didn't care to see that this had an effect on the students that go to Newberg High School or go to Catalyst. They didn't seem like they had empathy to see how that could affect any of us, and it was really shocking to see them do that, and I think a lot of us were shocked.
Yeah. So back in the summer of 2020, when this first Newberg school board member voted no, did you get why was there all of a sudden an interest in the community about what was going on in school board meetings? Did people anticipate that more people would join the school board thinking this way, or why was there renewed interest?
I'm guessing just passion for, feeling wronged, feeling like they were doing something wrong. I think a lot more people gained interest in it, and, these issues, as they've gotten, issues like this have come, more around and more just in the air, and, we're all aware of these issues. It was very shocking to see that a school of all places would try and take something like that away when it's so needed, and it was weird to think that they would do that, and it was shocking. Like, that's all I really have to say about it. It was shocking.
Now, Jesse, you told me when we were planning for this meeting that you had applied to be a school board member that summer. Can you tell me about what was going through your mind and why you decided to apply?
I had decided to apply because one of my teachers actually brought it up to me, and I had saw some of the stuff about what was going on in the school board, and I felt kind of like obligated to share what my opinions, and share people that couldn't speak out or didn't feel comfortable, me being a Mexican, and me being queer myself. I felt like it was my responsibility for myself and for others to, back them up, to show like, hey, like, to show to the board, like, this is not okay. Like, you guys need to rethink this. Like, it seemed like we were being very dehumanized, and we weren't being listened to, and no empathy was being given out to us. I got interest in that a little bit before, and then actually my teacher, her name's Elaine, and she works at Catalyst, she brought up the representative thing, and as time went on, I applied to be a representative. In 2020, I didn't hear back from the board until actually this year, a couple months ago, and unfortunately I didn't get the spot. But I was very passionate about getting that spot, so I could, speak for myself and speak for other people in the community that deserve their voice being heard.
Thanks for sharing that, Jesse. Josh, I'm gonna, hopefully this question is okay for me to ask you, just as an adult member of the community and as somebody who was working within the school, what was the response from staff and other counselors at the time, that time in 2020 when there was that one school board member who could not sign off on the anti-racism proclamation? What were your thoughts on that then?
Yeah, there was quite a bit of confusion. He didn't immediately provide explanation for his vote. It did spark, like you suggested, it sparked a larger community conversation, which created the interest in the school board, and also, I think, a larger involvement in just people kind of cultivating their own opinions about what the role of a school is in providing safe places to learn and places where there's sort of universal acceptance of one another's diversity and differences.
At the time, did it seem like the community interest was more centered in the school, or was it the broader community at that time?
I think it was the community. There were a few, or there was a specific Facebook group that was formed around that time with the expressed interest of learning together and advocating for equity in education, with the recognition that not all students need the same supports in order to be successful. You know, if one student breaks their arm, we don't put everyone in a cast, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we needed a different response to the needs of different students. And fortunately or not, unfortunately, the school board those meetings were providing a larger conversation about what equity is, how it's different from equality, and why this is important for our schools to value.
Right. If we could now move on to the spring of 2021, that was when the school board elections were this past spring. Jesse, can you tell me, do you know if the students were paying attention to the school board election at the time?
Yes.
Just based on what was happening in the previous year?
Yeah, a lot more students were paying attention. I actually, like, if I ever Googled anything or ever went on Google, there's these little tabs that are under just informing, like, of news things. And the school board, like, for the couple months that this was going on, the school board continued to come up under those recommendations and those things. And a lot of students started to get interested and started to talk about what was going on. And I started to talk within my family about what was going on. And, you know, there was a lot of students in support of the ban, and there was a lot of students that didn't think that it was right. And I think that a lot of students became more interested, and there was a lot of uproar, and, you know, a lot of students didn't feel heard and didn't feel safe and cared about. They didn't know what this meant for our school's future, for our future as, you know, as BIPOC people and as, you know, queer people. Like, they didn't know what that meant for their identity in school, and whether, you know, they were going to, you know, just be outed and, you know, completely not cared about. You know, it felt like safety was kind of disappearing, and it felt really bad to know that our own school board was going against us. A school board that's supposed to keep us safe, a school board that's supposed to enact things that keep us safe and keep us together as a community equally, and, you know, keep us all together, and they're just, you know, ostracizing these groups, you know, and it was insane.
Josh, is your take as an adult, like in the community and as somebody who was involved in the school, were adults aware of the consequences of this election and what it would mean if these two individuals ultimately got on the school board?
Yes, I think they both ran on a platform that was expressed expressly against the ideas of equity, and they were supported by public officials who also had made their positions very clear leading up to that election. So I think if you were paying attention, it was pretty clear.
Do either of you have any idea what why the turnout like was? I don't know. I don't know if it was like a really high turnout or a low turnout, but it seemed just with the renewed interest in what was going on that, I mean, a lot of people would have turned out for the school board election. Do either of you know what it was, what the numbers were?
I think it was a little higher than what you would expect for an off year May ballot, but still lower than it probably should have been.
Okay.
There were some other things that happened during the election that made the process kind of confusing. One student or one candidate backed out of the race not in enough time to get his name off the ballot, so it created some confusion in a three-way run between him and another candidate who was supporting the ideas of equity and the candidate who eventually won.
So it split the vote.
It split the vote, and the candidate who won, I think, won with about 40% of the vote.
Okay. So that leads us to that infamously contentious July 13 board meeting where the board first began to introduce the idea of banning BLM and pride flags on school grounds. Jesse, you kind of like talked about this already, like the atmosphere at the time. I mean, did that decision though make things, did it feel different than what had happened in the year prior? Did it feel more final?
Yeah, it definitely, it felt more final, and it felt defeating.
Right.
That, our school board voted on that, a board that's supposed to keep us safe, a board that is supposed to, do everything in their power, to make us feel safe when we come into those school doors, and it felt very defeating. And I know from talking to my friends at school and other things that they felt defeated too. They were shocked, and it was very sad to see, and it felt like we weren't cared about, and we have to go through these struggles in our everyday life, as being queer, you already feel as you don't belong, or that you're wrong, or that you're doing something wrong, and you're constantly already feeling that you don't belong, that you don't have safe people to confide in, and I thought that that's what was going to happen. I wouldn't be able to recognize who I could confide in, or what I could talk about, or what I could wear, and it was a very confusing time, and I had a hard time fathoming it, and coming to terms with the fact that this is the new reality.
I'm sure that must have been so difficult, especially, after a year of, the COVID pandemic era too, and already feeling disconnected from school and powerless. Josh, at that time, I know that you and 15 other school district counselors wrote a letter to the school board. Can you talk a little bit about what was in that letter and like what made you sign off on it?
Yes, we co-wrote a letter together, and then we each wrote our own letters along with hundreds or thousands of citizens in Newberg that ultimately weren't responded to. Our letter together was focused on the safety and well-being of students, with trying to recognize that some of our students are already in a vulnerable position, that there's an inequity in opportunity for students, and that is demonstrated in some of our outcomes, and that ultimately students need to be safe before they can learn. It was like a 2.5 or 3-page letter, but that was the gist of it.
Thanks for sharing that. And I think I did read the letter, and I think one idea that struck me and stuck out to me is this idea that it's the marginalized students that need these signs to feel, to feel welcome and safe in their learning environment. And the other side, the white cis, heteronormative like groups, they aren't going to need that because they're already validated in curriculum, in pop culture, and everyday life. So it's,
Yeah, I think
and
our
I think
argument
that
was,
idea is lost, right?
yeah, I think
That
our argument was that this is like a very simple, minimal, like the bare minimum that we can do to
Mhm.
demonstrate that students are welcomed and that we desire to be adults that are creating safe spaces, classrooms and offices where students can be known and affirmed for exactly who they are. So in some ways, we were seeing the ban as, sort of an attack on the most simple way that we can demonstrate students being welcomed.
I'm going to segue a little bit over to the month of September and the news about the slave trade group and the teacher's aide who showed up to school in blackface. And this is open to any of the students on our panel, including the Lake Oswego students. How did y'all feel about these incidences? And were you surprised, Jesse, were you surprised that it happened in Newberg? And to our Lake Oswego students, would you be surprised if it happened in Lake Oswego?
Seeing how like I don't know much about like the community and like Oswego and how they I don't know how their school or the people out there just how their community is and stuff like that. I don't know if I could speak on that personally.
Jesse, were you surprised that those events happened in Newberg?
I was not. I was not surprised that those things happened. And following up with the board after all those things happened, like it was just proof enough that we need change, we need education, people need to know about the disparities that POC go through, BIPOC people go through, LGBTQ plus people go through. They need to understand so that they don't do things like that. And it was very, even an adult coming into school dressed like that, thinking that was okay, having
right.
Not that I know that they knew that was not okay, but having the gall to do something like that and not thinking like logically in their brain, like, hey, maybe this wasn't a good idea. It's obviously that they do not have the education and or they do not have the empathy to care about that. And
right. I did take a look at the letter that one school board member who voted against the anti-racism proclamation, and that was his argument was that the anti-racism proclamation isn't needed because these policies are already in place in the existing system. And I think that assumes that people or staff, teachers don't need education or training in these matters. And you're right. This incident with the teacher showing up in blackface and thinking that is okay is evidence of the contrary.
And I myself have faced racism from teachers at my school, from students at my school. And it's very, very clear that we need education on these things. I mean, there's no denying it. When you walk into that school and you look a little different from somebody, you're immediately, taken back by the comments that you get and the statements that are made about you, and it doesn't make you feel cared about. So a board coming and trying to take that away when that was kind of the safety net that was there in place, it makes other people think that that's okay and that people don't care if they do that, and it will promote more students to act like that, to do things like that, because they're taking away that safety net, that lifeline that we need, that tells them that these things are wrong.
Maybe Lauren or Sophia, like, what are your thoughts on those two incidences? Can you see something like that happening in Lake Oswego? How would you feel if it did?
I can take this if you'd like. I mean, I think my answer is without outing anyone and without outing specific classes, it already has happened. I mean, it's
Right.
happened, more times than we can count, especially in the Lake Oswego High School. I mean, this is the kind of situation where kids treat this situation like a joke. A lot of kids come out of high school not even understanding what exactly white privilege is. So for there to be an instance where blackface is used as means of, humor, as means of a joke, I would say that this is something that's honestly a commonality. And even if blackface isn't being enacted and someone's not actually painting their face, there's still so much, around that. There's still jokes made about it. There's still, the what ifs and the hypotheticals. The concept of it has been turned into a joke by children that don't treat this seriously because there's a lack of critical race theory being taught.
Definitely agree with everything Sophia said. I remember specifically in middle school, the Lake Oswego Junior High ended up on the national news because there was an incident of racism against a Black student. And I think even though in high school these things seem to disappear, they just like kind of hide under the radar, right? And I think the case of NEWBERG shows that even if at surface level, Lake Oswego High School seems fine or seems okay, or the school district itself seems like it's doing fine, those things can change so quickly, and that these things are, and like these kind of sentiments that are against people of color and like LGBTQ people, they're always hiding there, and they're just waiting to come back. Like even if these kind of changes are visible, for example, in the spring of 2020 with the Black Lives Matter protests, we saw a lot of visible change. But it seems that since then, specifically in NEWBERG, we've seen those things being repealed. And I think that it's only a matter of time before it spreads unless we do something to stop it and do something to really confront it.
To add on to that, I totally agree with everything Sophia and Lauren have said. Adding on to that, to be completely honest, I'm not extremely surprised that something like this happened within our community. If anything, I'm more concerned just because the fact that something horrendous like this is happening within our state and in our community, it truly makes me scared that something similar to this can also happen within the LOSD school district, especially at LO High, which is unfortunately also not very unlikely. Although we are obviously attempting to make lots of progress against racism in our community, it's clearly not being effective enough. Considering that something like this happened in NEWBERG, that proves that we're clearly not putting enough effort in, we're not getting the impact that we want, we're not getting the results that we need to see, because something like this wouldn't have happened at all if we were making enough progress. So, like, for example, I have a friend who told me that she's been called the N slur at least several times these past few weeks. I've seen rude and inappropriate comments targeting LGBTQIA students on social media. And I've heard stories of students at my school appropriating Native American and Indigenous culture with makeup. I've heard the word hate crime tossed around as a joke and people making fun of racism and harassment. So with all these examples and experiences happening within our school and our districts, to be completely transparent, I can see something like this happening in Lake Oswego as well, which is a clear problem. I just hope that we can make more efforts and make more progress to actually address it instead of just having these conversations and not actually getting any benefit out.
Absolutely. Related to that question about whether or not you can see incidences like this happening in Lake Oswego, the timing of the slave trade Snapchat incident and the blackface incident were really close in time with the NEWBERG school board ban. Do you all see a connection between what is going on with the school board and the decisions that they make there and what happens in the school and the community? In other words, do their decisions embolden acts of hate or racism in the school or the community?
I think that they definitely, what they have done and what they have shown is that behaviors like that, you know, are okay. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that it goes deeper than, you know, what happened in the school board, but I think that what happened in the school board will make more people think that that's okay. Problems like this go way deeper, you know, and it's about not enough education and not enough empathy to care that these things are not okay. And if we were teaching, you know, critical race theory from, you know, a very young age, or teaching our kids about racism, teaching our kids about bigotry from a really, you know, young age, and telling them that, like, hey, that's not okay, it's, you know, this isn't something that is okay, maybe these kids would have thought differently about what they did. um and I think that what they've done now is just proof enough that it doesn't seem like they care about these situations. It doesn't seem like they obviously ever did, and it doesn't seem like they ever will. um and that's really frustrating, and it's really scary to know that a board that's supposed to keep you safe doesn't care about your safety when it comes to needing that. And it's very frustrating. It's barbaric. It's it's horrible.
That makes a lot of sense. A school board, I understand many districts, they are in charge of coming up with the policy and the direction for a school district. You know, they hire and they fire the superintendent. So it is, I can see why, you know, their decisions would have that type of impact on the school and the community, the broader community. Sophia, Lauren, and Nidhi, do you have any thoughts on like the impact of school district decisions and whether they embolden acts of hate or racism?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think even in a, growing up and going to a private school, this is the sort of thing that only enables students because, if all that you're receiving is a slap on the wrist, that encourages students to do things more. And especially with private schools, the presumption is often because they have money, they can do whatever they want, regardless of whether it's ethical or not. So oftentimes when it comes to racism and when it comes to homophobia, students think that they can get away with whatever they want. Teachers think that they can get away with whatever they want. Because of the lack of repercussions, we've had multiple teachers at my old high school repeatedly use the N slur and have repeatedly ostracized and isolated queer students, making them feel incredibly unsafe. The same goes for Black students. It's gotten to the point where students leave not only with a degree, but with an incredible amount of trauma. I think the same goes for public schools as well, knowing kids who go to public schools and come out with that degree and with that trauma. It's this continual cycle that only gets aggravated. When decisions like this are made, it emboldens people and they feel comfortable because in a way, it's like this invisible martyr. Once those acts get passed and once decisions are made that say, hey, you have, some liberty, some flex to, engage in disrespectful behavior, to engage in hateful behavior, they feel as though they're not alone and they feel powerful because of that. So it emboldens them in a way.
Not only do I feel that kind of these permissions or permittances of kind of sort of hateful behavior allow or embolden things like the slave trade, Snapchat, and the Black teachers' aid dressing up in blackface. I think on the other side of that, the wins that school boards do have when they pass good things, those aren't celebrated enough either. And I think in general, there's a lot of apathy too when it comes to those kinds of things. And on the other side, there's a lot of, taking anything they can get when it comes to creating hate. And then when we do have wins, then we don't celebrate it enough and we don't point it enough and we don't appreciate it enough.
Good point, Lauren. Go ahead, Nady.
Yeah, thank you. Adding on to that, just like the other panelists were talking about how when the school boards pass these legislations and enforce these restrictions, it not only like approves and makes these behaviors and actions accepted and makes them okay and acceptable. But also with harmful decisions like these proclamations being made by school boards and only the adults that possess that power, that influences students and youth in our communities that are targeted. So in this case, it would be students of color, queer students. It would make them feel like their voices don't matter and that they have no say to make change in our community. So if students do want to make change, usually we're told to reach out to school board members if we want to help influence something to be happened. But in this case, we are not able to do that because the school board is the one enforcing these oppressive decisions, and it makes these targeted students feel more weak and powerless and like we're almost overpowered and there's nothing we can do about it. Because normally we were told to reach out to them if we want to make change, use our voices, and advocate for the better in the school district. But overall, the fact that the school board is the one enforcing these policies now is what's causing students to feel overpowered, lose hope, and give up, which has really been a big obstacle within the fight to combat racism and hate within our community.
Nidhi, you bring up so many great points about school boards and how they're run, and I want to come back to that. But right now, I wanted to segue into general impressions, thoughts about the impact of the NEWBERG decision. Jesse, you've talked a lot about how it's made you feel, how it's made your peers feel, and how it's impacted your sense of belonging and safety. Let's turn it over to the LO students though. Nidhi, I think you had mentioned that you wanted to answer this question. How has the NEWBERG school board decision impacted you, if at all?
Yeah, so one thing from my experience is that I'm a part of the Lake Oswego High School leadership class. So one thing we do within our class is make posters and like advertise for upcoming school events. And something recent that happened was that we had a football game, which was the theme white out. So basically everyone was supposed to wear white for the football game to match with our school theme. So we made these posters saying white out for our entire school to see so that everyone could correspond and match with the school theme. But then the day after we made the posters was the NEWBERG incident. And then everyone heard about the teachers showing up in blackface, dressed up as Rosa Parks. And that really inflicted fear and a sense of almost reality within our school. So we really had to address the situation. And we were worried that something like that might happen within our school as well. So we had to like rebrand the whole white out theme. And we had to like go remake all the posters to say wear white instead of white out, because just the idea of something like that happening in NEWBERG really raised fear and more cautiousness and awareness within our school district to take more action and more preventative measures to incidents like this happening within our school community. And overall, like there's just been more attention and awareness towards it. Like these topics, everything that's happening within the school decisions being made at NEWBERG, you know, people are talking about these things in the hallways, on the buses, at school with their friends. It's coming up within our lives, not only because we don't go to NEWBERG, but because it's still a part of our community.
Right.
You know, whether it's for sports games where we go to NEWBERG or we compete against NEWBERG, it's gonna come up in conversation and we need to address it. Just because it's not our school district does not mean that it shouldn't matter.
Right.
And in addition to that, there's just been a lot of awareness on social media as well. A lot of students have been like reposting informational posts, spreading awareness about the situation at NEWBERG. A lot of people reposted like screenshots of the Snapchat messages that were sent in that group chat that we were talking about. And people have just been really affected about it and really passionate, so much that I feel like it's more of an issue within our community as a whole. I'm glad that people are taking the time and effort to try and address it and try and educate themselves about it. But going back to what I said for a previous question, if we were making enough progress, this wouldn't have happened at all in the first place.
Thank you for sharing those thoughts, Nidhi. Sophia and Lauren, do you have anything to add to that? How did the Newberg decision impact you,
So
if at
for
all?
me, I feel that I'm probably on the other side of the coin as Nidhi, and I think this might be because we run in different circles, but because I don't tend to be very politically active or active on social media at all, but I think me and my friends and the people I hang out with, I have not heard a lot about Newberg at all. And I think I saw one article about it back in August, and that was how I knew about it. And so I think there are, of course, different areas of the high school and like different kind of spheres going on. And I think the sphere in which I, usually reside in, I suppose, is one that isn't as aware of those things. And I think it's those students that really that we need to publicize these kinds of events for, because the people that Nidhi are talking about are doing a great job of like talking about it and creating discourse. But the people that I see every day and the people that are my friends that don't know about these things, those are the people that we need to like reach out to and make sure that those people are aware of what kinds of things are happening and how it could directly affect them.
Right, and that could be an opportunity too for the school or for the adults in the community to also step in and do their part too, right? Sophia, did you have something to add?
Absolutely, yeah.
Lauren, I think you made a brilliant point. I mean, the only thing that I would add really is that, hearing the decisions about Newberg, this all sort of culminated after I had graduated, right after I graduated. So it was kind of this moment of, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I got out of here when I did. Because I can think back to freshman year where we had to, there was a vetting process if you wanted to be part of the queer student organization because queer students weren't safe. So what you had to do was you had to email the teacher in charge and they would give you a secret location to go to. Because if there was a public location, there was the risk for student safety. So it's kind of, it reminds me of freshman year where I literally had to lie and say, hey, I'm just going to play basketball during lunch or something. I'm just going to do this, or I'm going to do that. But other students literally had to lie to their friends because they didn't feel safe. So it brings me back to that a little bit.
Yeah.
And it just makes me worry for students. It makes me worry for queer students of color who have it a lot worse than I do, because queer students of color are treated far worse than white queer students, honestly. I know that white privilege has saved me as a queer woman more times than I can count. So it really concerns me for Newberg students and for students, honestly, anywhere across Oregon, just about their safety and about what this is going to do for their mental health. Because if students don't feel safe and they don't feel like they have a place to belong, high school can get really lonely really quickly. So I hope there's some outlet that can be created to give students like that a safe space.
On that note, let me steer discussion towards BLM signs and pride flags. A lot of other people in the community think that these signs and symbols are divisive and they're a distraction to education. And this is a question to anyone on the panel. Talk to me a little bit about what these symbols and signs mean to you.
Pride flags play, a big part in who I am and a big part of my identity that I have had to sink down and close off of myself for a big while. And it feels, very good to know that my family doesn't support doesn't support my sexuality and me being queer. And it feels good to go to a school or see a sign or see a flag that is, in support of me. And it feels welcoming. I feel like, I'm cared for. And unless you've ever been in shoes like that, and you've taken yourself out of the narrative and put yourself into somebody else's shoes, you don't understand that. And it's interesting with what's going on is people that see their state flag or the American flag, like they feel the same exact way. I mean, you see your representation. What does that make you feel? How does that make you feel to see the American flag plastered or anything else that makes them feel welcome, that makes them feel wanted, like they belong there, you know? And it's no different for us. You know, that's how we feel when we see stickers, when we see shirts, when we see flags, anything that represents us. It makes us feel safe. It makes us feel like we belong. We know who we can confide in. We know who are our safety nets. We know who to go to, you know, and we deserve that. And we're human, and we don't deserve to be ostracized because of an agenda. And we deserve to be loved and be cared about. And that's what every human deserves. And it's the bare minimum as a human being.
Exactly.
Those are amazing points, Jesse. I just wanted to, Nidhi, Sophia, Lauren, do you have anything to add to, what those symbols mean to you?
Yes. And I want to speak actually to a point that was made earlier in the chat. I know there was some ruckus going on a little bit earlier regarding what flags mean. And I would bring, and this isn't even an argument, but to what Miss Benson was concerned about regarding BLM flags and regarding pride flags, they're never created in a place, where we're intending to ostracize people. The queer flag, in my opinion, is a celebration of queer culture. It is a celebration of queer resistance. It isn't meant to ostracize anyone. It's a celebration of the fact that we can say that we're happy and proud to be queer. When I see that flag, I know that that is a safe person, or that is a safe space. And for young queer kids growing up, that is literally, in some situations, a lifesaver.
Yeah.
So I think
or life or death.
It literally is. In some cases, in places like NEWBERG, I can only imagine that it is very much life or death. Jesse, I don't know what it's like to be at NEWBERG, but I can only imagine it's a lot worse than what I had to go through. And two, I think, again, Miss Benson's point regarding BLM flags, it's never meant to ostracize anyone. It's not, it isn't political. The fact that someone's life matters isn't political, and it never was. And I think sometimes that tends to be confused. But the idea that Black Lives Matter shouldn't be political. So, I mean, that's really all I have to say.
I wanted to transition this part of the discussion towards how do these symbols or the absence of them, or the decision of the school board, how does that impact your ability to learn and get an education? Does it at all?
For me, to not feel belonging where I am supposed to feel safe and supposed to get educated about things, it does, because when you don't feel that you belong in a space, you don't feel that you're safe in a space, you will not learn. Those are the basic needs that every person needs met in order to function as a human being. They need to feel safe. They need to feel that they belong. It's, like I said, it's the bare minimum of what humans deserve. And when we don't get our needs met, we don't function as normal people of society. We don't do what we need to do in order to get things done, because that's looming over our head, that
Right.
we do not belong, we are not cared about, we are not loved. And that is really disheartening, and that's hard to come to a school that you're supposed to feel safe in, and you don't. And it's not easy to learn in an environment like that.
Thanks, Jesse, for those words. I think I totally agree with everything you said. And I think personally, I came out as queer to my friends about a week ago, and it went really well. They were very supportive. And I think discovering I was queer was really a tough journey for me. And, it's hard to really understand or believe in yourself or have faith that what you're feeling is the right thing and what you're feeling is valid when other people are refusing to acknowledge that. And for me, the queer flags and the rainbow flag and what I imagine the BLM flag does for Black people specifically, those flags and those symbols reaffirm that I am valid, and that like, you know, that I am who I am, and that I think coming to the realization that I was queer really was a moment of pride for me because I figured it out. And to not be able to fly those flags or raise those flags or put those symbols on my backpack, it would be devastating because I it's just an outward symbol of who I am and the declaration that I'm not afraid anymore and that I'm not going to stay in the closet anymore and that people can do whatever they want, but this is what I am and you have to deal with it. And I think Newberg doing that just totally takes away that ability from me and makes it hard for me to feel like the school is a place where I can be safe. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for those powerful words. Nidhi, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yes, thank you. Before I get into what I was going to say, I just wanted to say congrats to Lauren really quick. Yes. Anyways, yeah, just like I think everyone kind of touched upon this as well, but overall, BLM, pride flags, things like these should not be politicized. Unfortunately, they currently are being politicized within Newberg and within school districts when they really should not be. It's not trying to oppress anyone. It's not trying to show people that they are invalid. Instead, it's trying to welcome people, show them that they are valid, that their voices are heard. And this is not trying to disrespect anyone. Like, this is not attempting to harm a certain group of people, unlike other groups of some things were mentioned in the chat earlier. Just some of those examples were some of those groups are examples of people that are attempting to oppress others, whereas the LGBTQIA plus community and the Black community, that is not intended to harm or oppress anyone. Instead, it's to magnify that community's voices and to make them feel like they are heard and represented. And by restricting these people's voices and banning flags, that's overall restricting people's identities, because Black identities and queer identities, those are like things about people that you cannot change. Those are people's actual identities, and that cannot be restricted within our curriculum or within our schools or within our communities at all.
Thank you, Nidhi. With that, even though I'd love to continue, I think it's time for us to take a break and transition to breakout rooms for 15 minutes. The purpose of the breakout rooms is to reflect on the discussion so far, the impact of the Newberg decision that it has had on students, and brainstorm what we can do now moving forward. So as a reminder, I just want to go over very quickly the agreement for our community discussion. First, speak from your own experience, use I statements, don't generalize other people's experiences, listen with full presence, curiosity, and openness to other perspectives, ask clarifying questions, assume best intent, and lead into discomfort and challenge biases. Finally, remember that a lot of these discussions stimulate pain in ourselves and others. So please be kind to yourself and others in your group. Finally, as Willie stated before, step up, step back. If you are a person that tends to talk, pull back and listen. And if you're the type of person who tends to listen, try to speak up more. And finally, I just want to say, everyone, please stick around, because after the breakout session, we'll return to the students and talk a little bit more about school board meetings, how they can be improved, and then hear from them on what they think we can do to support them and any lessons that we can learn from what's going on in Newberg. So thanks. All right, everyone, welcome back. Thank you all for participating in the breakout session just now. We're going to take it back to our student panel plus Josh and start talking a little bit about school board meetings. So this question is for any of the students. How many of you attend or keep up with school board meetings? Just in general. Sophia, you see that? Great.
I watched one of them because one of my friends from school, he was on one of them, and I watched one of them, and it was really, I've watched a couple of them, and they're very interesting to watch and interesting to hear about, you know, the different things that talking about, the most of what I got from what, kind of like the vibe and the presence that I got from those meetings was a big lack of empathy.
Mm.
It didn't seem like there was a lot of empathy in those, types of crowds, and, just a lot of the people in there didn't seem like they were outstretching themselves to feel, how other people feel.
Thank you for sharing that, Jesse. Anyone else want to talk about their experience with school board meetings?
Truthfully, I've never been particularly politically active. I've always been kind of a cynic, to be honest, about the power of school boards and political activism. But I think hearing news about NEWBERG and that kind of stuff has definitely changed my mind. And, coming out as queer. And I think, again, like I mentioned earlier, the circles that I kind of run around tend to share the same attitudes I did, in which, like, it's not really our problem, like, we support them, but we don't have to say anything about it, or we don't have a responsibility to go there because we're not those people. And I think I felt the same way for a while, and I'm just I'm a little sad that it took me becoming queer and having or discovering I was queer and having a personal stake for me to start caring about these issues. And I think that's something that we as a community can try and kind of confront.
Go ahead, Sophia.
Sorry, I don't want to take up too much time. Lauren, to your point, I don't think blaming yourself is, a thing that you need to do at all. Honestly, I think one of the main takeaways that I have from going to school board meetings is the lack of accessibility to students. They make these meetings at times where students usually have after school activities, usually have sports, and honestly, I would not be surprised if this was the sort of thing that they did on purpose. Most of the times decisions are made, for the well-being of students, but there's no student perspective involved. We experience this at my school all the time with issues regarding, sexual violence and racism within the school constantly. Students' opinions are disregarded. And I understand that, because we're not legal adults in high school, people can very easily believe that the decisions they're making are what's best for us, even if we don't know them. But having a student perspective is so essential to creating an environment that's healthy for students. And it's something that is so often neglected. Because honestly, if the well-being of the students were honored more, a lot of racism and a lot of sexism would have to be confronted first. And I don't think school boards want to do that, especially the school that I came from. So, Lauren, I really wouldn't put any blame on yourself. You're doing amazing now. And the system is what the system is. It's not built for students. It's built for administrators who want to feel good about themselves, nothing more.
This ties into my next question, and I think I know the answer based on what you all were saying, but can you all talk a little bit about whether you feel safe or attending a school board meeting or testifying, or how you feel, whether you feel your voice is being heard or your opinions are being valued?
I definitely felt uncomfortable when I was doing actually my application. I was scared that I wouldn't get it because members of the school board would not like my opinions. When I was doing my application, I was very scared about that, and I was actually relieved when I found out that the majority of the school board and the people that don't agree with stuff like that weren't there. It made me feel safer. It made me feel more confident to say what I wanted to say. And even though I didn't end up getting a spot, I'm glad that I got the chance to even try, and I would definitely try again. Because I think that it's important. Do I think I would feel uncomfortable? Yes. Do I think that it would fuel more passion in me? Absolutely.
Do you all have ideas on how school board meetings can be improved?
Listening. They need to listen. it doesn't seem like they know what that is, or like what attentive listening is. And I mean, you learn that from a young age, and it doesn't seem like a lot of them know what that is. But it's not hard to listen. It is not hard to hear what these students are telling you. It is not hard to open up Instagram or open up Twitter and see these people pouring themselves out to you, and seeing the messages, and the board hearing about this stuff, and they still do not care to listen. And that is
Mhm.
the most important thing, putting themselves in a space of empathy and listening. It's the most important part, and then enacting on that listening and doing what they need to do for us students.
What do you all feel about school student representatives on school boards? Do you think that's an adequate solution, or can there be more done?
I definitely have problems with it because I think historically, voices don't get heard unless they have a power to change the decision. And I don't think student representatives have really any power except to say what needs to be said, for the school board to say thank you for sharing, and then for the school board to vote however they please. So I think it's really important that we give students actual power over things. And if they make a bad decision, so what? That's the point. We have self-government for a reason. But giving students that power means that we actually have influence, and we actually have the ability to make changes rather than just, be there as like a token, like, yeah, we listen to the students.
Thank you, Lauren. Go ahead, Sophia. We'll have your comment be the last one on school board, since I see that we're running out of time and I want to make sure we get to the last question.
Okay, I will be as quick as physically possible. Lauren, you blow my mind with how incredible your
Yep.
responses are every single time. Oh my goodness. I agree. And I think that the really dangerous thing about having student representatives is either this could go one of two ways in my mind with how the system works. I think the potential for just having white students be selected to be student representatives and for it to become a very white only space is a very dangerous possibility. We're seeing this already with student governments, where students are elected by their peers, yet their peers, who still happen to be racist, only elect white cohorts. The school board gets away with a lot of stuff as a result of that because white students don't have the wherewithal to call them on their bluff. The other way this could go is that students of color are elected and turned into martyrs and or are tokenized, and the school board feels comfortable saying, we have students of color on the board, therefore we are doing enough and we don't have to do any more. This is all we need to do. And the image of that being presented as a front is what they feel to be enough. So those are my worries with having student representatives. I think Lauren said it best. We need to have a system where students have actual power and students can make actual change, because the whole goal of school and education is to benefit the kids after all. So having children's opinions be listened to and heard and uplifted isn't actually the craziest idea, to be honest.
Thank you, Sophia. Well, we are just about out of time, and so I want to turn it to the last and final question of the evening, and it's to the LO students. What lessons do you think we can learn from what has happened in Newberg? And to Jesse and Josh, if he wants to chime in, what do you think people in Lake Oswego or anyone outside Lake Oswego can do to support your community?
Well, on behalf of LO, first of all, I'd like to say to Newberg, you have our support, even if it doesn't seem like it. But there are so many people at our high school and in our community who are really standing with you and who are supporting you, even against these kinds of actions. And then as for what LO can do and what lessons LO can learn from Newberg is that we have to stay vigilant. It's the fight for justice and the fight for student rights and just rights in general is never over. And we have to make sure that we're always aware of what's going on and how we have to pay attention to what still needs to be done. And yeah, at the same time to celebrate any wins we make, but again, to always be sure that we are continuing to fight and never growing complacent.
Thank you, Lauren. Anyone else?
I can add something really quick.
Thank you, Nidhi.
I think the other panelists did a really good job of summing everything up really well. I also just wanted to mention that overall, I feel like today we've proven that you can't end racism after one meeting. You can't end anti-LGBTQIA actions after doing one thing. Like, this is an ongoing conversation that needs to be had. This is something that just doesn't end after you do one thing or after you elect one student of color to a school board or have one action taken. We need to collectively take more measures and more actions towards combating these issues and to increase representation and awareness to prevent these decisions from being made and for these things to happen in the future again. So overall, I feel like I've said this multiple times today and I'll say it again. The fact that something like this happened within NEWBERG proves that we're currently not doing enough. So we need to be doing more. We need to be taking more action. We need to be making more decisions that actually benefit the students and project their voices instead of restrict them and make students feel oppressed. So we need to really empower the students is the main message from today, especially queer students and students of color, which we have clearly seen has been a direct impact of the NEWBERG decisions.
Thank you, Nidhi. Jesse, as the lone NEWBERG voice, do you have anything to add on what we can learn from you all in NEWBERG?
Probably learn to not, follow in our school board's footsteps and just keep pushing for, us to be taken seriously and these things to be taken seriously and thought about and considered and not just thrown out there, and I want to say thank you to everybody who, the Lake Oswego people, everybody who supported and everybody who is supporting. It's amazing. And I want to say thank you and continue to keep it up. You guys are inspiring more people to support us and to come together as one. You guys have a big, love for us and that's amazing. And I love that. And I want to thank you all for that.
With that, we are just about out of time. So before I transition it over to Willie, I just want to again reiterate just our gratitude to you all, Josh and all the other students, for being here, being vulnerable, sharing your stories and your experiences so that we can know better and in doing so, be better here in Lake Oswego. So thanks so much, Willie. It's transitioning over to you. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, panelists, and thank you, Kim V, for moderating this awesome discussion tonight. My heart is filled. I'm a feelings person, and what I heard tonight coming from the young people here makes me feel happy. And there's hope. We have to get a little bit more more of them going and so keep spreading your wings and bring them on in. Robert Wagner, Rob, are you still here?
I have no idea.
Rob? Okay. He wanted to make an announcement.
Oh, sorry, Willie. Thanks so much. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you and then also let folks know that there's going to be 2 bills introduced in the 2022 legislative session. One of them that I co-authored with Janine Solman during the last session, it didn't get funded, which requires all school boards to receive a biannual audit and have to implement strategies around equity training. So it's Senate Bill 334. You can email my office and I'll hook you up with what's happening with that. State Representative Teresa Alonso Leon is going to be the chief sponsor of that bill. The second bill is in direct response to what happened in Albany and what we're seeing in NEWBERG, and that is that prohibiting school boards from firing superintendents who implement state mandated best practices as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and public health best practices. So if people want to stay engaged, I would love to have your testimony when we have those bills introduced in the February session. So you can email my legislative office and I can put you in touch with the folks that are doing that work. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Again, thank you. We have one last poll. John will put up the last poll, and Pat has some brief announcements. We had a long but a worthwhile conversation tonight. And so now it's your time.
As you're completing the poll, I just want to go ahead and say thank you also to the facilitators tonight who helped us in the breakout groups. And then also don't forget to turn in your ballots. They're due tomorrow. And I saw that Neelam had also put that in the chat. And also the passports, the Hispanic heritage passports are due at the library so that you have a chance to get registered for drawings to local Hispanic restaurants. So please get that into the library. And our silent walks have been changed to 3 p.m. due to the time change starting November 21st. Thank you so much for completing the poll. And thank you so much for coming tonight. And we appreciate all the panelists and for being so vigilant and so courageous tonight. Thank you.
Thank you to the planning committee, and to John and Dawn for your technology tonight. Thank you for coming, and we will see you next month, hopefully. Have a good evening. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.